Well, hi, my name's Phil Chambers. I'm here to talk to you about the future of management and employee experience. We might have a small technical issue, but I'll just give them a few minutes to sort it out. So I was invited here by Josef via a customer of ours, actually. So Simon from Contact.io is a Peakon customer, and yeah, has been using the product for a while. I've been on a kind of roundabout route to this journey. So I started my career for my sins as a management consultant. I'm an alumni of Manchester University, like John, so very, very great to see that. And then I've been basically a few different tech businesses across Europe, so you'll see them listed here. I spent some time in the classifieds game, so I went to Gumtree.com, and we launched. We started out as a really, really small classifieds player in London, then launched in Australia, South Africa, and indeed, back in about 2005, we launched Gumtree Poland, which was a proud day, and still going today. I then spent a bit of time in the restaurant review business, which was great because you always got the red carpet rolled out anytime you went out anywhere at Quip. And I've been through some trials and tribulations with investors trying to take the company off you and banging fists and all that stuff. Then ended up moving from Hamburg then to Denmark to start Podio with my current co-founder Casper. So we were in the collaboration business, empowering people to build their own apps, which led me to California, and eventually I ended up doing this, which is Peakon. So really, our new platform aims to provide both management and employees, everyone in a company, with the insights they need to reach their full potential. So how did we end up here? I'd like to give you a bit of history, and I haven't got a Wharton MBA, so you might want to interject and correct some of this stuff if it's wrong. Anyway, we start here with Taylorism. So Frederick Taylor really was known as the father of management consulting. He was most famous for doing what they called time and motion studies. Now, time and motion studies would mean you'd go down to, in this case, a pig iron plant, kind of watch the people as they worked and try and find ways to improve this. And I'm always fascinated by cultural history, and it's quite hard to put yourself in people's shoes. And Victorian people used to think that mountains were ugly. When I learned this, I was like fascinated. How could anyone think that mountains of the Alps look ugly? Well, back here, people didn't used to do job interviews, that anyone would just start a job. And it turned out, what Taylor discovered was that only 12.5% of people who started were physically fit enough to work in pig iron production. So he got rid of the other guys and then started with the strong ones. And then the next thing they didn't used to believe in was training. So no one got any training on the job, and obviously that made things a bit more difficult. And there was a few other innovations here, such as selecting the best person, compensation based on output and stuff, everything we're familiar with today. So he managed to, move, I think, 50 tons of iron ore. It used to take 500 people to do that, and he managed to reduce it to 150. The next sort of great innovator in management was Henry Ford. Now Henry Ford, obviously, in 1913, invented the sort of mechanized assembly line, which was revolutionary and was sort of founded modern American capitalism. The problem was that everybody hated their jobs, and he really, really disliked this. Henry Ford realized that by paying people more and asking them to work less hours, which was, a very radical idea at the time, actually he could get 10,000 job applications in a day. And he was really, really successful in doing this, and people called him a socialist, communist, and he was crazy, but it worked, and he really mastered that. The next person I'd like to talk about, or the next pair, were Albert Sloan and Drucker. So General Motors was, one of the most successful companies in the world at the time. So successful that Albert Sloan invited Peter Drucker in, the young Austrian, and to write a book about how they were great. And Drucker indeed concluded that they were brilliant. But the more interesting part, when he wrote his famous work about corporations, was that he didn't think that it would last. So Drucker pointed out that the sort of command and control structures that were built up in General Motors were vulnerable. And when this was presented back, it caused an uproar, and GM didn't really believe it. And Drucker later took his ideas to the Japanese, who successfully implemented them and then, of course, began to beat General Motors on their own turf. Can't really finish this section without mentioning Jack Welch at General Electric, of course. So Welsh, when he came into GE, I think it was a $12 billion company, and over the course of a tenure, they completed over 600 acquisitions, going to all sorts of different fields, from healthcare to jet engines, et cetera, et cetera. He really realized that to make all of these sub-businesses successful, you had to foster, small groups of entrepreneurs who had decentralization, autonomy, and really get great people in, get a great mission, values, and culture, and then the rest will come. A couple of these ideas are now falling a little bit out of favor, like stack ranking, of course, particularly in the last 2 years, has been thrown out, even at GE. So why is it that these ideas, some ideas stand the test of time and other ideas don't? Why is it that we think we need to change? Well, have you ever noticed that people are looking younger the entire time? Every time I go into a nightclub, it happens to me. I was at a gig in London last week, and I really, at 4 in the morning, thought, I'm the oldest person in here, I have to go home. So millennials, people born after 1982, are now the biggest component of the US workforce. I think they overtook Gen X and Boomers like last year. And this trend, of course, happened first in the US, happening anywhere else. So what's different about millennials compared to the rest of the workforce, the people we've been working with over the last couple of generations, and why is it? Well, here's a couple of different things when you compare the two. And the reason we look at them, so Boomers tend to be very focused on status, millennials more have a sense of purpose. You have the tension between salary-driven, people these days tend to be more experience-driven, Boomers tend to be very good with very specific goals set, millennials tend to want constant feedback. And what are the underlying reasons behind these trends? Well, there are many theories, but of course they've grown up in an era when a great education is now available to the masses. It used to be very much a privileged thing. We've grown up in an area of globalization where you have many, many choices. I think the creation of the European Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall meant that, I've certainly gone and easily worked in 4 different countries in Europe, which didn't used to be that common. Of course, the internet has brought an era of constant communication and feedback. So this feedback economy, people expect everything to be reviewed now. If people look at something, it's like, well, how many stars has it got? So there's this kind of concept of constant reviewing and communication that we didn't used to have. And it turns out that employees have actually really, really changed, but management hasn't. So we looked at some aggregate data. So we're running Peakon in tens of thousands of employees across Europe, Asia, and the States. And we looked at how millennials have changed and how they're influenced versus the non-millennial group. So this slide is looking at the influence of autonomy. So how much people enjoy being micromanaged. Of course, I guess very few people do, but millennials tend to want to be self-directed. And we found that autonomy has a 57% greater impact on engagement across the Peakon population than on the non-millennial group. And there's some sample comments there. So, people who give a poor rating, find that they don't have the freedom to make their own decisions. People who are scoring really high in this area find many problems to solve, but they get to approach them as they see fit. New tools and methods, they love working at that company. That comment may be from Contact.io. But of course, they do need regular feedback, and here's some more examples of it. This is, I would say, a classic millennial comment. It's made clear what I'm supposed to be doing for the company and how what I do helps the company. Well, what is the company going to do for me? People who are doing really well here love regular interactions with their manager and want to be coached on a regular basis. So it's often said that people should come first. Jerry Sanders at AMD said, people come first and products and profits will follow. Richard Branson said exactly the same thing. He said it after Jerry Sanders, but he's often more quoted. And over the last 10 years, what we've seen is an explosion in the understanding of customers. So there's been the NPS revolution, where people say, how likely are you to recommend X as a product or service? And massive businesses have been built in this area. So the rise of Salesforce as a CRM. We've seen like HubSpot and Marketo lots of marketing automation tools. And yet, if people are the most important thing in the business and really where we're spending a lot of money, why don't we understand them as well as we understand our customers? We think this is very, very important because, of course, it's now possible and maybe unheard of in earlier days for the largest businesses in the world to get disrupted in less than 5 years. So this chart on the right is our old friends Henry Ford and Alfred Sloan again, showing their market cap and the rise of Uber from a sort of standing start to now be worth kind of more than Ford and more than GM. And the internet and the many platforms on the internet have sort of enabled this. So you now, when you're putting a business together, of course, you don't need to start from scratch. You can take the infrastructure of Amazon and then use that as a starting point, so you don't need an operations team. All of your comms can go through Twilio. Your mapping, pretty central to the Uber experience, can come from the team at Google who've had 6,000 people working on it for almost 10 years. Your payments are done, your email is done. Even more process-oriented things. So Onfido, who share an investor with us, do all of their background checking for their drivers in London, so they don't need to do that anymore. So you can very, very quickly put together a business which is more than the sum of its parts and challenge the incumbents. So where does this leave the future of management? Well, we believe at least that the smart companies have already figured this out. And Laszlo Bock, of course, from Google, has said in a very famous statement that people management decisions based on analytics are the most important decisions that you can make in a firm. You can't produce superior business results unless your managers are making people-based decisions based on data. And of course, it's been really, really effective for them. They are constantly known as the best company to work for, not just once, but many times. They're constantly a company that most graduates want to work for, and have achieved the status of vying with Apple for the top 2 slots many times on a very clear policy of hiring the best people and then managing them in a very, very analytical way. And this is also true at other great companies, right? Tesla's 3 main focuses, again, are engagement first, from which will follow customer engagement, from which will follow sustainable growth. And so far, it seems to be working fairly well for them. Employees, of course, now come to expect this. Like these guys have set the bar, and your company really, to compete, has to also be doing this. So you have to be offering the ability for your employees to give constant feedback. You have to have very, very clear growth opportunities laid out and constant feedback on those. And people want to feel like they're making an impact on the world at the end of the day. They want to know, how is my job going to change things? How am I going to make an impact outside of this company? And what is the purpose? Like, why are we coming to work today? And you put all of those things together, and we call it great employee experience. And it's really what Peakon is trying to deliver. So I think to draw a sort of anecdote from the software development world, about 20 years ago, people realized that waterfall software development had some problems, that if you wrote a gigantic specification and then spent a year implementing something and then released it to market, and invariably it wouldn't actually be the things that people wanted. And in the HR organization, is now looking somewhat like, marketing or software development, 10, 15 years ago. Coming from a kind of world where everything was anecdotal, it's kind of, I don't think the people in your department are that happy, but how is that trending? Well, now you can be completely data-driven. Coming from a world where, you would ask your employees once a year how they were feeling, but, your average tenure of an employee is now tending towards 2 years, and you need 3 points on a chart to draw a line, then how can you draw any trends if you only do annual cycles? You need to move to continuous feedback. Continuous feedback, of course, allows you to get real-time results and then make data-driven decisions about the actions that you change. So, of course, you're going to put some programs in place to change things in the organization on a continuous basis, and then you'll be able to actually see whether they work and fix them. We're automating a lot of the cruft around this. So, of course, you don't have to send reminders to employees. You don't have to figure out who's answered, who's not. You don't have to, send reports to your managers and then figure out whether or not they've read them. It's all self-service on one platform. And I think the experience part, can't really be underestimated. So, your employees are used to having experiences from Facebook, from Instagram, which are absolutely beautiful. And consumer software, over the past 5 years has just kind of come on leaps and bounds and, user experiences. And yet, the stuff that people then get in work when they try and submit a sickness request or try and fill in a form is like absolutely ugly and doesn't work. And it really turns people off and means that you don't get the experience you need. So we're trying to fix these problems at Peakon, trying to provide a great employee experience so that everybody can improve. Thank you very much.